We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180. We're going to take a little bit of a turn here. Our second guest is the director of the Western Regional Office of the National Right to Life, Brian Johnston. Brian, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Good to be on with you, Marty.
Well, Brian, the last time you and I are Facebook friends, but the last time you and I spoke, I think it was a little over 20 years ago. I was guest hosting for a friend of mine, Helen Fabian, down in Orange County, and you and I, about the same time of year, were talking about Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, that's right, and obviously it's a good place to start again. The reality of Roe is that when they came down in '73, that was I was in high school, and not only did I not understand what was going on, the vast majority of Americans who were impacted by this had no idea it took place. And the sweeping nature of Roe was completely not just misunderstood, it was not examined. It was just a little blurb during the Nixon administration that this had happened. And yet its sweep it's really the most sweeping decision the United States Supreme Court really has ever made, in one sense, because literally, aside from, it can only be compared to the Dred Scott decision, to be perfectly honest, where it took one situation in one state and then said this applies across the board. That in fact, Dred Scott only applied to slaveholding states. So
that's right.
The reality is that every state had laws at that time which protected the life of the innocent child in the womb. Every state. Now, some states like California and Massachusetts and Colorado had slightly, quote, more liberal laws, but they would only allow abortions in the very, very hard cases you always hear about. And, the typical litany. What about rape? What about incest? What about life of the mother? What about severe fetal deformity? And which is, and nobody knows what that last one means. What is severe and what is deformity? But nevertheless, those are the only cases. Very, very few abortions are done for that. That was the case in California. We had more liberal laws here. But after 24 weeks in California, you could not kill that baby. So you had to give a really good reason, and that baby had to be really, really, really young. Again, the reason they had to be really young is most Americans really don't understand that life begins at conception, and they don't understand the dynamics of life. In fact, that's even what Justice Blackmun said. We don't know when life begins. So he was exploiting the ignorance of the average person on the nature of how we grow in the womb.
Well,
so that decision came down about Texas, but it wasn't just about the Texas law. The Roe v. Wade decision struck down the laws in Texas and in the 49 other states and all the territories of the United States of America, saying that you could not protect that baby because of a woman's right to choose, because her health may be in danger. If this is what she wanted, then that had to be granted to her. And that was sweeping. Very few people understood that. So it took years for us to actually, if you will, educate and let people get them to understand the sweeping and important nature of what happened. The right to life from our founding documents was literally struck down in '73. And that started the movement which we now call the Right to Life movement. We want to restore the right to life as it was given to us in our founding documents, because that is what has made this nation great. This nation is great because it esteems individual lives as important, not the power of government, but individual lives are those that make the difference. That's what God has given us, life, and we're the ones that give the government authority, and not the other way around. So it's a very important decision, and I think when we were talking, you had commented about when we were talking about it 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember 20 years ago, and it's funny, it's one of the shows I remember most when I was on the radio before, and it was a show where you explained to me the definition of the prenumbras of the Constitution, and you and I got into something where we started actually laughing about it because it was so absurd, because I guess from your explanation, the penumbra of the Constitution, penumbra means the shade. So what they're saying is it's not here in the Constitution, but we're taking it from the shade of the Constitution. How absurd is that?
Yeah, it's exactly right. That's exactly what it's not a legal term. It's actually from astronomy. And to be more specific, what a penumbra isn't even just a shade or a shadow, literally umbra from the Latin shadow. It's almost penumbra. It's almost a shadow. And it's when there is an eclipse of the sun And, of course, you know that part of the Earth is darkened. And then there's a whole swath on either side of that shadow that's called the penumbra, where it's almost totally darkened. And so what Justice Blackmun said was literally this right to have an abortion, it's not in the Constitution. But you know what? It's in the penumbra. We found it in the penumbra of the Constitution, which is just an extraordinary concept.
Yeah. I mean, that's insane. We found law in the shade of the Constitution, in essence, is what they're saying. I mean, that's absurd on the face of it. We're having a conversation with Brian Johnston, the director of the National Right to Life. So, I mean, that's absurd, absolutely absurd. Judge Bork in his book, and I can't remember the name of the book offhand, but he had a...
He had several. Slavoj George Koerner is the one I have.
Yeah, he had that classic comment, I thought, where he said, if you're talking about the right to privacy, doesn't the right to privacy end when you bring in a doctor? Because now you're bringing in another human being.
Sure.
It's no longer private.
That's right. And, of course, you're talking about another human being with that baby. You don't have the right with your own child to, this has happened, you don't have the right to snuff out cigarettes on a toddler's arm. And there's people depraved that have done that. Well, just because it's their baby, and they're doing it in the privacy of their home. They don't have that right, because there's another human being involved. And so the authorities have to step in and say, no, even though this may be your child, what you're doing is wrong. It must stop. And that's exactly the same parallel with abortion, is that the child, yes, is indeed her baby. That's true. But it doesn't mean she should be free to kill that baby just for choice. And remember, think about choice. Think about what the ideology of choice is. You don't have to give one of those hard reasons. You don't have to say, I'm going to kill this baby because of this reason, or because of rape, because of incest. No, it's just because I choose to. It is, on its face, the most arrogant and the most dismissive of philosophies, and yet we are applying it freely in the USA. And the implications for our culture and nation are vast, because, as you know, it's gone beyond now just abortion. So we have to address this. We have to restore the right to life if the United States of America is to continue as the nation that it was created to be.
If you look back at, this is Clay, if you look back at Chicago legislators, specifically Obama when he was a senator, he voted to allow an aborted baby that might be born alive somehow to be left on a table to die and give it no care. I guess you remember that.
That's exactly right.
What was it called?
Well, I think if I remember right, did he actually vote for that, or was he absent for that vote?
No, he voted for it.
He voted for it okay.
As a senator in Chicago.
Okay.
But I guess just putting that aside for a moment, what's the situation with the Obamacare and abortion?
Is that for Clay or me?
It's for you. This is Clay talking.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Again, Obamacare is something that many Americans don't fully understand. This is the vast power of the federal government. Again, the most powerful government on earth. And that's the tragedy of this. People don't understand what their government is doing at certain times. As people like you, Marty, you and I was in the gallery when it passed. I watched as Congress literally passed this bill. It is the most sweeping measure. And think about what it does. It puts the health care, the health of every American, in the hands of the federal government. Now, the health of your physical body is your life. The health of your body is your life. So the lives of every American have now been handed over to Obamacare. But the way that it's been written, and it's in effect, but it's been written to gradually go into effect, and it perfectly fulfills that metaphor that we've all heard, that if you put a frog in a boiling pot, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in tepid water that it's comfortable with, and then gradually turn up the heat till it boils, it'll stay there until it's cooked, and then you have your frog legs.
Brian, that's a perfect analogy, and let's pick up there when we get back, okay, from the break.
Okay.
We're talking with Brian Johnston on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180.